All right. P and Z, we get to talk about Vi. So Vi is a 5 cost 2/5 with Challenger and Tough. 5 cost 2/5's kind of low stats for a 5 drop. While I'm in play or in hand, grant me +1/+0 when you play another card. Max +8/+0. So this buff is permanent when you play the cards, as long as she's in one, either in play or in your hand. And then when she strikes for 10 or more, the strike can be hitting a unit or hitting the Nexus. And when she levels up, she becomes a 10/6. So I just want to point out, she only really gains 1 health. She doesn't really gain any attack because she just had to strike for 10 or more. And then when she strikes a unit while attacking, she also deals 5 to the enemy Nexus. So Vi is a cool card just for the kind of the stats alone. As long as you're consistently playing cards, which you almost always are doing with almost any deck, because it's easy to get this 2 up to around a 5, and then she's a 5 cost 5/5 Challenger Tough, which is good stats alone. And when you do get her leveled, they then have to block her to stop 10 damage, but then they still take 5. I think she's really solid if you are consistently playing enough cards that when you draw her, even as like a top deck, you can get her up to at least a 5/5. If you're doing that, I think she's great. And she can often be a good way to both control the board in the middle of the game and also be a finisher when she's leveled in the end game. What are your thoughts?
I think she's really interesting. I think there's 2 ways to play her. So you kind of mentioned one, which is if you can consistently play enough cards. That's decks like Lee Sin Vi deck that's been floating around. In the same way that with Lee Sin, you want to play a ton of spells. Well, if you're playing a ton of spells, you're playing a ton of cards. So Vi kind of benefits from that as well. So that's been floating around. I think the way I will generally play her will be in a control list. There's a deck that Alan ZQ just made called Karina Control with Vi. And it's very similar to Karina Control that we're all used to and hate. Because it's a very annoying deck to play into sometimes. Great deck to play, it's lots of fun. But to play into, you have to use a bit of big brain thinking sometimes. Or just aggro brain, depending on what deck you're playing. And Vi fits in there actually really well, because where Karina Control can struggle is kind of that like turn 5 point, where Demacia is kind of getting too beefy for a lot of your removal. And you're kind of just praying for Ruination to happen. There's a point where that does happen in a lot of Karina matchups, and Vi slots in there perfectly as a 5 drop, which is before your Ruination. Because Ruination you'll be doing on turns kind of 6 through 9, 6 through 8 really, is kind of where you're looking to ruinate. So Vi works as a 5 drop for you to play on 5. If you're attacking on 5, you can kill one of their units, more than likely. You'll probably have her around to a 5/5 by this point. You can kill one of their units to make their attack on 6 weaker. You can then force them to open attack into Vi because you have the threat of Ruination behind it, where if they don't open attack, you can just Ruinate. And if they do open attack, well, they're attacking into your Vi, who has a 5/5 toughness. Maybe at this point it's 5/3 because you killed something. But nonetheless, like that's a really, really, really strong kind of combination to like make it so Demacia is weaker into this deck, or kind of those slower mid-range decks that tend to do better into control than a traditional aggressive deck.
Yes.
So yeah, that, like overall, I really like the card. I think the card's great. At first, I didn't actually like her champion spell. So her champion spell is what is it called? It's not suited up. It's something breaker, isn't it? It's Vault Breaker. And as a main deck card, I don't like that. As a champion spell, I love it because there are niche cases where you can just spam that thing and threaten lethal.
It's also pretty good. So when I'm playing Vi is with Heimerdinger, and we're going to look at that deck in a second. But this is a decent spell to get. Just buff an elusive, get another elusive to play, so you can get your combo where you OTK them with elusives.
Yeah, that does sound pretty scary.
I mean, I'm not running any of this in the main deck, but just the potential of getting it is pretty strong.
Yep, no, agreed. I don't think you'll ever want to run a main deck because, I mean, maybe a one of. That would be the most I could see it as.
If you want to play a meme deck, you can play Cloud Drinker.
Do it infinity times.
And then use Dawn and Dusk on the Cloud Drinker, right?
Yep.
And then you make it cost 0, and then you have buff infinite attack. I think the only thing that would limit you there is the game timer.
Yeah, well, actually, I don't even think that would, assuming you're not going slow, because every time you play a burst spell, your timer goes.
Oh, it does? Okay, so you can just stall the opponent. Even if you're not winning the game, you can try to get your opponent to leave, maybe.
So all you reppers out there, stay out of my games, because I'll leave. I will 100% leave.
So this is the Heimerdinger Vi deck that I've been playing. This is... I don't know if this is the version that I'm ultimately going to go with. I really like Eye of the Dragon, and so I'm probably going to find a way to get Eye of the Dragon into this deck. The reason that this deck wasn't playing Eye of the Dragon is basically it runs Solitary Monk, and you want to hold your spells a lot of the time to then combo with Heimerdinger so that you get the turrets out of them. So in the early game, you're just going to use your standard removal spells to clear off whatever aggro plays. And you're going to use Claws of the Dragon to, again, just continue to stall. You have a body to play. Sometimes you're able to get it down for free early game versus aggro, and that'll basically win you the game. It just stops too much damage. Then in the mid game, you're trying to attack with these elusives, get in some damage, and try to save 3 spell mana so that when you drop Heimer, you can actually have the 3 spell mana available to play Twins, to play the Flash of Brilliance, to generate, as we all know, this elusive turret, and win the game with the elusive turrets. However, unlike old Heimerdinger decks, because this deck has Vi, oftentimes when you play your turrets, you're able to get her very easily up to the 10 attack mark. So frequently you can just protect Vi and she'll win you the game if your turrets fail to win the game. It's a nice plan B to have. And then if you don't draw Heimer, she's just good to play in the mid game. As MTuck was saying, when you're up against Demacia, you'll start falling behind without a card like Vi to fight for the board. And she does that very well.
One thing you mentioned in strategic that I think is a good thing to talk about, actually. You mentioned how Vi in a Heimer deck is a really good plan B. And I think it's actually really important. This is kind of an aside, but I think it's important nonetheless to explain what makes a good plan B. So in deck building, a good plan B is a non-committal plan B. Meaning if your deck has cards, so let's say your deck has plan A, plan B, and you have cards that work for plan A and cards that work for plan B, but cards that work for plan A don't work for plan B, and cards that work for plan B don't work for plan A. That's called a committal plan B. That means you have cards in your deck that are committed to making plan B work that don't help you plan A. That's bad. That's really bad because it makes your deck inconsistent. You might draw like half your combination for plan A and half your combination for plan B and just kind of lose because you didn't draw the right cards. What this deck does is have a non-committal plan B. You're running the same cards you would run in a Heimer deck. You've just chucked Vi in because it fits. It makes it so everything that helps Heimer actually helps Vi. And so you have a non-committal plan B that if you were to make a Vi deck, you'd basically have everything in this except Heimer.
That's exactly right. The only problem with this deck if you want to play this deck, is Loyal Badge Bearer is 4 health. The only way to hit 4 health on 3 is with Thermogenic Beam if you have stored spell mana. I mean, and that's just not that common. Yeah, you can trade your Solitary Monk into it, but how happy are you to trade your Solitary Monk into their Loyal Badger Bear?
That's a super feels bad.
Yeah, it feels terrible. But just nothing else works. The card is really strong. So I don't know how strong this deck would be on ladder. It looks like it'd probably be a good tournament deck, and there's some people in Masters that are playing this deck, but it seems so bad against just 3-cost 4/4 that I don't think it'll be a good long-term ladder deck with the current cards in the game.
Yeah, I'm not sure about ladder, but I could see it being a good tournament deck. So Heimer Karma, yeah, was a ladder, or not a ladder, a tournament deck that was seeing a lot of success. Both EU and NA number ones from Duels of Runeterra, I think it was number 7, it might have been 6, had Heimer Karma in their list, or in their lineup. And the reason is because it uses the same region combination of Heimer, or of Karma Ezreal, except the matchup table for Heimer Karma is very solid. It does well into a lot of things. It counters elusives. It does well into the Bannerman if you can play Heimer and Flash of Brilliance a few times. It does very well into control lists because there's a burst of damage from turn 5 to turn 9 that controllers struggle to deal with. On top of this, you have Deny to deal with Ruination. So its matchup table is just really, really solid. It does really well into a lot of different decks. Where Karma Ezreal has a bit more of a swingy kind of matchup table, it does extremely well into control, whereas it does extremely poorly into faster aggro decks. So,
and just to mention, when we're talking about tournament scenarios, usually you bring 3 decks, and you can't overlap regions at all, and you get to ban an opponent's deck. So in that format, Heimerdinger does very well.
Yeah, because you don't really want to ban Heimerdinger. It's not something that you look at and go, my deck can't beat it. It's something you look at and go, my deck has a low odd of beating it, but not my deck can't beat it. So it doesn't actually get banned nearly as much as it probably should get. And you end up instead seeing bans to SI happen more because Ruination can kind of just counter a lot of decks. So yeah, it's a really solid deck. Whereas if you played Karma Ezreal, that would get banned or not banned every time. And if it gets banned, it's because it would have won you a lot of games. And if it doesn't get banned, it's because they're running an aggressive lineup that they know can kind of just beat Karma Ezreal.
Yeah, that's sort of an aside, but it's an important distinction that some decks do very well when you're able to ban certain cards out of the game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There are definitely, tier 2 decks become a whole lot more viable, and if not better, in a tournament environment than tier 1 decks do.
All right. Our final non-Bilgewater champion is Maokai. So Maokai is a 4-cost 1/4, and the first time you play another ally each round, you toss 2. Toss is a new mechanic. It obliterates X non-champion cards from the bottom of your deck. That non-champion part is a big deal. And you summon a sapling. And a sapling is just a 2/1 with elusive and challenger. So again, there are lots of cards in the set sort of that give you free bodies. This is another card that gives you a free body. And then when he levels up when your units have died or your cards have been tossed 25 times this game. And when he levels up, he becomes 2 attack, 5 health, regeneration. And when he levels up, you obliterate the enemy deck, leaving 4 non-champions. And then at the round start, you summon a sapling. Maokai is a reasonable card if you're not going to level him, but he's absolutely insane if you do level him. Where Maokai is seeing play is in sea monsters and in like dedicated toss decks, where you're just trying to level him, and then you combo him to use some of the plunder card draw to finish off milling your opponent out, so you win via deck out. But I do think Maokai is a decent card just to play on 4 to generate these saplings in that sea monster game plan. I don't think it's bad there, and I've seen and heard some people say that they don't really like that application of the card. But I think based on the 4-drop options you have, that Maokai has a decent stat line and helps you stall and toss so that you can reach that dream late game scenario where you're playing giant sea monsters off of the deep mechanic, which we'll get into when we discuss the deck.
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think Maokai is, so he was my favorite champion in the previews. I thought he would easily make a tier 1 deck. Kind of looking at him, I was like, this is either gonna be a meme or great. But every time, like especially once they came out with the new the Bilgewater cards, I was like, this card's gonna be nuts because you can pretty reliably flip him, and you can. In a dedicated Maokai list, you can flip him by turn 8 and deck them out the same turn, using cards that draw from their deck, and it's pretty reliable. The downside between a dedicated Maokai deck, you don't really have any way to swim out. So you have no way to really deal with fearsomes. You have one unit, so you have a 3/2 lifesteal that can deal with fearsomes. But outside of that card, there's not really any other cards that deal with fearsomes. So Maokai is kind of weak to getting challenged, and Demacia right now is kind of all the rage. And they run a lot of challengers, so he's weak to getting challenged. You really don't want to lose one of your Maokais. You can, draw into your second, but that is a risk that you have to be willing to take. So yeah, like he was my favorite champion on review. He still is probably one of my more fun playstyle decks. I think eventually we'll find there is a control list that makes him really well, but it wouldn't be a dedicated Maokai list. It would be a control list that eventually plans to flip Maokai.
Yeah, I don't have anything else really to add. I don't think it's. I think when you focus really hard on a unit, like one unit, your deck is very vulnerable to having that unit removed, and it doesn't seem like the combination of Bilgewater and Shadow Isles can consistently get us multiple copies of Maokai drawn.
Not unless you have tossed down to like give or take 15 cards, because at that point, then your bottom deck Maokais are starting to kind of move up. But even then,
yeah, I mean that does help, but I think that's the problem the deck runs into. I think the game plan needs to be, I'm gonna get the second Maokai, and it's not reliable. So I haven't played a bunch of sea monsters. I've played against sea monsters some, but this is the somewhat popular sea monster deck that's floating around. The goal is just to really fast toss your deck to get deep and play control tools to stay alive, like Vile Feast. It runs Salvage, and then Grasp and Withering Wail. Just standard removal cards. And once you are deep, so the way deep works is when you have 15 or fewer cards left in your deck, all your deep units are +3/+3. You just start dropping insane bombs. Abyssal Eye is a 6/6 elusive deep Nexus Strike, draw a card. Devourer of the Depths, obliterates an enemy with less health than me. So Obliterate doesn't even trigger Last Breath. Just gets rid of it permanently. It's what you would call in other games remove from the game.
It's one of the only things that can also counter Unyielding Spirit, which is nice.
Oh yeah, this wrecks those Garen Fiora Unyielding Spirit decks.
Yeah, you basically have to perfect curve against this deck if you're facing as a Demacia deck that's not a scout deck. You have to perfect curve into them, because then you can kill them before Nautilus comes out. But that's your only chance.
Right, and then once Nautilus comes out, on top of them all being huge, you first refill your deck with only these strong deep units. You get a 13/13 that's tough, that's fearsome, and we haven't talked about Nautilus yet, but and he makes your sea monsters cost 4 less. That's the key point here. Your sea monsters cost 4 less. So it makes
with
all
this
these...
deck. It's really important to understand because we're kind of on the topic of Maokai.
Yeah.
Maokai is not the build around here. He's another plan B that we mentioned earlier, kind of like
Oh,
Vi
yeah.
in the Heimer list. He is a non-committal. He adds to the game plan, actually. He actually helps you get deep. He's non-committal, so you can feel free to drop him on 4. If he dies, so be it. If he doesn't die, great. That if you happen to flip, and for whatever reason your sea monsters haven't killed them already, then cool. You've got them on a 4-turn clock on top of having big sea monsters.
Right. The other key point here is getting back to sort of how I think about Maokai. I think he's just a decent unit. This deck just doesn't have 4-drops that it wants to play. So he's good to play on 4.
Yeah, the only 4-drop you could potentially put in here would be Zap, which is the elusive tutor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zap's really strong. But this deck's not even running Lure, for example, right? So
yeah, I think Lure has to be cut. The more I thought about it, I was like, draw. So the reason the Lure is a card that makes your sea monsters cheaper and draws you a sea monster, and it costs 3 mana. The reason I think that has to be cut from this deck is because you're not actually worried about, like, the draw sea monster isn't actually that great. The reason being is because due to just how Nautilus plays out, you're going to have a lot of sea monsters because your deck is going to be pretty much just sea monsters when you play Nautilus, and on top of that, you're not, like, for the first give or take 6 or 7 turns, you're not playing your sea monsters, so you're going to have a ton of them in hand from drawing them naturally.
This is another card, right? That looks like, oh, this card goes in sea monsters, right? And it's not in this list.
Wait, it's not?
Right, Jaw Hunter is
That's
not...
crazy.
Yeah.
What?
Well, this card, in theory, if you're on the attack, right, is good against Demacia. So
yeah,
if you want to be good against Demacia, you run this card, but it doesn't play into this game plan of just dropping Nautilus and then dumping your big deep dudes at that point.
True.
You're better off saving the spell mana and Withering Wail, Grasp of the Undying, having Scrap Shot available. It doesn't toss. I mean, it's...
That's true, actually, yeah. No, that makes sense. It doesn't... Because this is a good way to think of what we would call a mid-range list that plays very heavily like a combo deck.
Yes.
But in the triangle, it fits in the kind of the mid-rangey style where it tends to beat other combo decks. So, like, this should theoretically beat Karma Ez, I would think.
Yeah.
Because it should kill on turn 8 or turn 9, where Karma Ez needs to kill turn 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
It should lose to control lists that have Ruination. And most control lists have Ruination. So it should lose to control. And there's like a little mini meta against other aggro decks. It should beat slower aggro decks. It should not beat really fast aggro decks.
It depends how fast they are, of course. If they're on, like, burn stuff, right?
Sure, if you draw 3 Withering Wail into any sort of aggressive deck.
Yeah, right. And then the wonder, but this deck usually isn't fast enough to beat the Demacia MF Quinn decks.
Yeah, that's the sweet spot of kind of where you want to be when you're versing a really slow aggressive deck. You want to be kind of just above the fastest point, because the fastest point being kind of a Nox P and Z burn, because a lot of the mid-range lists that are a bit bit slower are going to have ways to deal with that in the same way a control deck would. So this is an example. Withering Rail and Grasp are great ways to deal with, P and Z burn.
Right.
But they have no real way to deal with like MF Quinn. Like I drop Quinn. How are you killing Quinn?
Yeah, you have to pay 7.
Like, and on top of that, you killed Quinn, not Valor. So I still got I traded up mana and kept one of my units.
That's right, and that's the problem. That's where this deck lands, though. So if the meta is on the faster aggro decks, this deck is pretty good, and if the meta is more on that, I guess combo-y area, then it's good too. But that's why it's in the mid-range category.
Yeah, if we're in a control meta, this deck might do okay. I would think because this deck's so slow of aggro.
Maybe your plan here is to play this against control and get a treasure.
I would still be playing Nautilus on curve because you need to basically the way you play against.
I'm not saying
control.
On 7. I'm saying that's the game plan if the game goes late.
Sure. Because you need to be able to have recovery for a Ruination.
Yeah, you have an out, but it's not a strong out. Maokai's a stronger out, of course.
Maokai would be good for risk control. The big thing I think is not as Nautilus. It's still because you have combo tendencies. Your way against control is to go heavier into those combo tendencies.
Yeah, if you hit, then it's very strong. But it's about hitting something like the Hoarder and something like the Maokai, and that's what you're trying to do against control. Maokai's not a reliable win condition against Karma, though. So
no,
they're going to shuffle. They're going to play Karma, and when they play the Karma Champion spell, they're going to shuffle her back in. Just because it obliterates, leaving 4 non-champions, doesn't mean your opponent will not have drawn 2 Karmas.
Yeah, and any good Karma player is just going to hold 2 Karmas in hand. If you're versing a Maokai list, you actually, funny enough, get a bit of a buff when they flip, because you drop Karma, play 2 Karma, or play your Karma, which doubles Karma. It puts 2 Karmas in your deck. And then once you do it one more time, your deck is half Karma.
Right, you're gonna deck out potentially before them, because they theoretically can't deck out.
They can't deck out. Once you do, as long as you have 2 Karmas in hand, when they play Maokai, you will have a Karma draw eventually every turn.
That's right. So that's why this deck loses to the control-y decks, because the control decks don't actually deck out. Well, the Karma-based ones, and I don't know of any, off the top of my head, control decks that are seeing play that aren't Karma-based.
There is a GP control that sees some play, but it'd be very similar. Well, that deck's running Maokai, so it'd be first to get Maokai, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's really it. Controls. Karina control is coming back right now as well.
Oh yeah. If Karina comes back into the meta, I think this is okay to try to Maokai mill them.
Probably if you
have enough healing where you're not going to die to Karina. Maybe they'll Ladros you in time, but they have to Ladros combo you.
Yeah, it'd have to be Ladros plus Atrocity. Think the only way to do it, because your Ladros would not trade well into their sea monsters, which sounds stupid, but
that's right. But that's the world that sea monsters lives in.
But yeah, Ladros attacks and Nautilus blocks, and you sure you can play Ladros again, but that's your entire turn. Meanwhile they play 4 sea monsters for the same price.
All right. Well, I think that's it for the non-Bilgewater champions, and we're going to come back and do another video where we go over the Bilgewater champions and discuss where they fit in the meta and what we think about them. Well, that's all it for now. I'm Strategic Gamer.
And I'm MTuck.
Thanks.